after 6, so we'll go ahead and get started. Folks, we want to thank you for being on tonight, and we have Mr. Neil Hunt that is out of Pike County, and what's the Beekeepers Association over there, Neil?
It's the Pike County Beekeeper Association.
Okay. And so Neil has been a beekeeper for a long time and real active in extension over in Pike County. So I'm going to just hand it over to him.
All right, thanks. So I think most of y'all probably know who I am. Like you said, my name is Neil Hunt. I'm the president of the Pike County Beekeeper Association here in Pikeville. Been beekeeping somewhat around 17, 18 years. I'm very active with Kentucky Queen Breeder Association, chasing feral honeybees. Probably do most of my talks on swarming or queen genetics. But like I said earlier, I've been looking in my hives last few days, and we've had a terrible spring with the weather, and really concerned about bee nutrition. I feel like most of our losses in this area last year from the hives that I lost, which luckily I didn't lose very many, but some of our beekeepers lost everything. And I think a lot of those losses were connected to nutrition. In the fall, the bees here did not have a whole lot to work, not a lot of pollen or nectar. And so, of course, the queen's natural sense is to when the food sources slow up, then her laying slows down. And so we did not build what we term winter bees. And those are the bees, the fat bees that take the hives into winter and keep them alive during the cold months and bring them out in the spring. I've seen a lot of hive loss late in the year with they had honey. As far as what stores were left from food that they were being fed, the population just dwindled to nothing. So we are going to talk a little bit about bee nutrition. So go ahead, Caitlin. That one. Share. It was right here. It isn't sharing it now. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay.
You just need to enlarge it.
Yeah.
Tap the little green dot.
All right. So is that good?
Yes.
All right. So nutrition, and a lot of times when, especially earlier on in my beekeeping days, when I thought about nutrition, I thought strictly of honey, nectar, or sugar water, depending on if I was one providing it. And that will keep bees alive, but it will not grow the hive. Nutrition is, especially what we're learning now, is a lot more than honey and nectar. It's pollen and even water. So, of course, nectar and honey are important. That's their carbohydrates. But the bees also need pollen for their protein source. And so we focus a lot on making sure they got sugar water stores. But to be honest with you, my bees took pollen substitute all winter long. And I started feeding pollen subs probably in August last year when I realized that there was not a source because of the drought. So we'll go through these. Of course, nectar and honey is used as the bee's energy source. All right. And of course, they gather that through foraging. And it's very important because they use it for their energy of heating the hive in the winter. This frame here is a great example of what you want your bees to have going into winter. or what you want to steal for surplus in the late summer. No, don't get too far. So pollen, or proteins, amino acids, minerals, vitamins, and fats, and such things. And a lot has been studied on the diversity of the pollen. With monocrop cultures being more popular, that they found bees that were completely packed on pollen and starving to death. So pollen diversity has gained a lot of attention in the last couple years. Pollen and its diversity drives the growth and reproduction in the hive. And of course, the percent of pollen and the protein in the pollen varies from source to source. And that's what comes in with the importance of a good bloom variety, and also in a good pollen sub. At one point, I actually fed my bees soy flour, and they took it readily. Bees are optimistic gatherers. They'll get anything they can from any source they can, whether it be the best for them or not. Corn is probably one of the bigger examples of that. Corn being a terrible pollen, but the bees work it like crazy. Bird feeders are another example of where they can gather a type of protein that's really not that great for them. So by providing a very good pollen sub, I prefer which one is it? From Man Lake is the one I like, but Day Dance AB23 works great. I use them both. And those are formulated to give bees more than just a normal protein. So they help with the hive. And then, so whenever you get into your hive and you're looking at your brood, if you see that your larvae are not being fed a lot of royal jelly, and I know most time you think a royal jelly with queens, but if you look in there and those larvae are not floating, then it is a nutrition issue. And so you can get brood even though the queen's laying, but the bees will not develop properly either. So you will get small bees or bees that won't live as long, especially for your fat bees in the winter. So they need this nutrition. So pollen is very important, and we're lucky in Eastern Kentucky. We are a very pollen-rich area for the most part. A lot of places look at us, especially like out in Western Kentucky, and they're jealous because our pollens are robust and plentiful for the most part, especially in the spring and summer. Right now, we're finishing up poplar, tulip poplar. Very little nectar from tulip poplar here because of the rain, but I have hives that have collected quite a bit of pollen from that. Of course, we also got clovers blooming right now. Locust seems to be finished up, chestnut starting to bloom, and basswood is tagging out. So hopefully basswood will be our saving grace for nectar. But all those are excellent pollen sources leading into fall. So bees store the pollen in the brood nest area of the hive, and for the most part, it's stored around the larva because the nurse bees need a ready supply of it. And so when you look at the arrangement of the comb, you'll see the brood with your larva and cat brood in the center, and then generally the bees will store around that circle a area of pollen, and then on the outside of that an area of honey and nectar. And that's a very good, when you see that, it's kind of what we call textbook arrangement for the hive to have it placed that way. Pollen is placed in cells and mixed with honey. So that's where the old term for bee bread, or my father always told me when we grew up, we'd watch the bees packing in the pollen, and he called it bee bread. So what they do is they mix it with some nectar and it ferments. And then, of course, the fermentation process, if you're familiar with people eating fermented foods, it raises the nutritional value of it for the most part, and it doesn't spoil. So the bees mix the pollen and the nectar into the cells and pack it in. So here on this picture here, you can see this is a top bar hive I had several years ago, but this frame is completely filled with pollen. And it's of all colors. If you look, you can see some reds, which is probably dead nettle for that time of year. Some dark oranges, which when tulip poplar was coming in, and there's some lighter colors. Locust is usually a lighter color, clovers is a lot. But that diversity in pollen right there is everything you want to look for in your hive. Just like for people, if we eat the same meat and the same bread every day, we would starve to death because there's no diversity in the diet. So pollen is part of that diversity of the bee's diet. Again, here is some pictures of the bees packing the pollen into the cells. And they are super efficient at it. Some hives I have seen hives that have 2 and 3 deep frames of pollen, and that always tickles me. You can get too much, I guess, if you get completely full of pollen, but you want them to have a lot, especially during this time when they're building up their population. So when we talk about the amounts of food that the bees consume, these stats here are one that absolutely amazes me. The nurse bees will feed the individual larva 1,300 times a day. So at some point, all day long, the nurse bee will come by and feed that larva inside that cell. So the queen is laying 1,500, 2,000 eggs a day, and they're generally larvae for from day 4 to around day 10 or so. So for like 6 to 7 days, these bees will get fed 1,300 times. So you're talking thousands and thousands of feedings. Generally speaking, it takes 1 cell of nectar, 1 cell of pollen, and 1 cell of water to make a bee. So you can see how quickly they can use up resources in a time of dearth. You really have to be on top of nutrition to keep your hive growing. Starting generally here in July, I'm a little concerned with after this spring has been kind of bad with what they've been able to gather with the weather. But when we go into our dearth in July, I have seen hives eat through supers of honey and frames of pollen in a matter of weeks and collapse. So the hive as a whole, each year, the hive will consume about 150 pounds of nectar and 100 pounds of pollen. So really, I didn't think about take this into perspective until I was picking up 50-pound bags of pollen substitute, and I realized that my hives are consuming more than this a year. Just an astounding amount of work that these bees do just to produce young bees and to grow the hive. So when I talk about larvae and nurse bees, this picture here shows the nurse bee feeding the larva in the cell on the bottom. Those big worm-looking white rolled up grubs are the larvae. Those are very old larvae there. But that is what we're talking about feeding. And you can tell an awful lot about bee nutrition when I inspect the hive just by looking at the larvae and seeing what kind of condition they're in. So again, nutrition drives development and starts at egg and then feeding them royal jelly. This little chart here is one that if you've ever heard me talk, you've seen. I show it in everything I do. It is basically the life cycle from egg to hatch adult for the queen, the worker, and the drone. And everyone knows what role nutrition plays in queen development. Royal jelly, the abundance of it, helping her develop into what she is. But it's also just as important in worker and drone development. Drone development, we are finding that in a lot of areas, especially areas that are in monoculture or kind of restricted to what flows they have, that the drones are not producing the amounts of sperm that drones do in other areas, and that's leading to weak mated queens and less hive development based on how much she can lay. And surprisingly, uh, it is nutrition at larva stage that makes this. So once the cell is capped, it's too late to correct the wrong, so to speak. Um, we actually need to be proactive. And with the queen breeders, any hive that I have that I wish to collect drones from with II or insemination, or if any hives that I want to make sure are pumping out good, healthy, fertile drones, I will always substitute pollen, even during a nectar flow. I give them pollen subs because I want those bees as healthy as possible and as well fed as possible. Um, and it has been amazing to me learning that, early on in queen rearing and in beekeeping, uh, to me, I thought the queen was the mother of the hive, the driver of all things. And then at some point, I learned that she was an egg-laying slave that the workers control, and that surprised me. If she's poorly mated, or she's has not got the correct nutrition, and she's not laying or producing as eggs as she could, they'll kill her. They'll kill her, supersede her, and replace her. Um, so her role is still important, but at the same time, you see where the bees will try to correct it. And then I've known some friends that are having some real issues with collecting sperm for their insemination, or even with um, their bees' longevity in laying their queens based on how well they were mated. And they're finding that all of that is coming back to nutrition at larval stage. So super important. So again, talk about feeding bees. And one of the things, and my beekeepers group over here, I will tell you, are not young people. It's a lot of older beekeepers, and I love everyone in the death. But every year when I tell them to start feeding their bees, that nutrition is given out, at least one of them will tell me they don't want welfare bees. And this is usually when the time we rob our bees too. So not only are the bees not bringing anything, but we took what they did make. And so I try to remind them that it's not welfare if we steal it and don't give it back. It's more communism. And so basically, when I talk about feeding bees, it's giving them what they need to both survive and raise brood. Um, Sugar and pollen subs. And I always tell people this: never use honey from another beekeeper. Um, there's too many diseases that is spread through honey for the bees that don't affect people. American foul brood is an example of uh, a disease that will not affect you, but you can spread it through the use of honey. It's always okay if you know your honey and it's safe to feed your honey back, but not to reuse someone else's honey. Also, um, a lot of beekeepers over here will feed their bees candy canes or peppermint candy. A bee's digestive system is particular to some things. You can actually give your bees a really bad stomach ache if it's in the winter and you're feeding peppermint or other sugars and they can't get out in time to take a defecation flight, then they'll get the bellyache. A lot of times it can result in edema-like symptoms. So always be aware that what you're feeding your bees needs to be a really high quality. And I know these things can be a little bit more expensive, but at the same time, we want to make sure our bees are surviving and thriving. So going into July, especially here, I always tell everybody we live and die by tree bloom. And so I'm watching real closely the basswoods and the sourwoods because that's kind of like our last hurrah in this area. because once we leave the sour woods, we're going to go through a dearth of at least 2 or 3 weeks before fall blooms start showing up. Yard clovers, Dutch clovers, all those things start giving up in the summer heat. So being very mindful of that, we need to be ready to help our younger hives, especially the younger hives, develop a population that can get them into fall and through winter. So that is my quick spiel on nutrition, and it's important. Uh, so what type of questions do you all have? If you can, I don't care to take questions about how I feed them. Most of my pollen is dry pollen fed fall and winter, and I just use a PVC pipe hanging feeder. It keeps the pollen stuff dry, and it gives the bees a readily available access to it. A lot of people just put it out in a box or something, but if dew falls on it or if it rains, it clumps up. So the PVC pipe feeder that you see online is super easy to make, and I've got 2 of them that I pretty much keep full all winter. Sugar water, it depends really on when I substitute sugar water. I like to do community feeding. I've got one of the Kelly 9-quart sugar water feeders that I put out there. For the most part, summer, fall, I feed 1-to-1. As long as the bees have time to actually work the sugar water and dehydrate it going into fall. 1-to-1 is more for brood rearing, so they don't have to work it as hard to make it work for brood. But going into late fall and winter, you do not want to give them something that thin because they won't have time to dehydrate it. So going into winter, I actually up mine to 2 sugars and 1 water so that the bees don't have to work it as hard. And if I have hives that are lagging on actual honey stores, I will individually feed those as well, just to try to bulk those up. But if I do, and it is during a dearth, you want to make sure that you're watching for robbing. Bees like to rob when there's nothing else to do. They go looking for other people's stuff. So, all righty. Any questions about any of that quick spiel?
That's good, Neil.
So I have been swarm trapping too. Just before we end this,
Let me, before you get into the swarm trapping, let me
go
ask,
ahead.
what, if anything, have you done to extend the nectar flow? Have you planted anything? Do you have a way
Oh, yeah,
to?
it's a great question. Yeah, so every fall, I do a cover crop of crimson clover. It's the big red clovers. And if I plant it in the fall, it does well over winter and it blooms. Generally, it starts blooming in April and it lasts a good couple of weeks and it's a good nectar source. After the clover gives up, I'm getting ready to do it. Plow those same bottoms up and put buckwheat in them. I generally plant 50 to 100 pounds of buckwheat around my bees. And again, that's another nectar source. And I try to time the buckwheat to where it starts to bloom as our basswood dies out so that it gives them a little bit more of an edge in that dearth that follows the buckwheat or the basswood. The buckwheat will generally bloom within 3 weeks and then bloom for a couple weeks. So it helps a lot during that dearth. A note about buckwheat: if you plant it and you work day shift and you come home and your bees are not on it, it's not because the blooms are bad or the bees aren't working it. Certain plants, even true of some of our trees here, only produce nectar certain parts of the day. So buckwheat will produce nectar all morning up to about 12 or 1 o'clock. And then after the bees have sucked up all the nectar, they go on. And so by the time I get home from work most days, there's maybe 3 bees on a field of buckwheat. And then, of course, the other people here are talking about all the bees they've seen on it all morning long. So, but buckwheat is an easy plant. It's good for gardens, for cover crops, and so is crimson clover. So it's kind of a dual purpose. It does really well for the bees, does really well for the soil. A couple other things I do plant. Um, I do plant a lot of fall bloom stuff. Wing stem is the yellow stick flower that we see a lot around here. And so in the fall, I will gather, late fall after it's dried up, I will gather those seeds and spread those out along the roads and stuff up here to give them a boost because it's a wonderful pollen nectar source in the fall. But probably as far as cultivated, it would be crimson clover and buckwheat for me.
Good deal.
I plant a lot of milkweed and stuff too, but I'm kind of a sucker for butterflies, so it does both. The bees and the butterflies like it.
Any other questions for Neil on this first part? I don't see anything in the chat, Neil. You can add things to the chat, folks, if you think of them later. But Neil, if you want to go ahead and talk about the trapping that you've been doing.
Neil, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Excuse me, I had a problem getting unmuted there.
That's all right.
Do you consider sumac a good source of nectar? I noticed the bees really love it.
Actually, sumac's a big one. Yeah, I've noticed that it's developing its pods right now, and if you get in an area where there's a lot of sumac, your bees will excel on it.
Yeah,
I've got a couple of trees out here in the backyard, and I constantly watch them. But I don't have a whole lot of sumac here. I wish I did.
I got a grove of that stuff. It's some land that's kind of grown up and it's just come in and sumac. And I was up there about 3 years ago. It comes in around when the blackberries are ripening, and I was picking blackberries, and I heard all this swarming. I actually thought I was near a swarm of honeybees because they were really working.
Oh, and blackberries. Blackberries is a huge nectar source for bees and pollen. It is one, honest to goodness, if you live in an area where there's a lot of blackberries, it will outdo tulip poplar some years. So that's good. And what was you going to say, Shad? I'm sorry about the office. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, you're fine. It's hard to not step on each other on Zoom. I was just going to say that we've seen a tremendous number of bees on that sumac, and we've also seen a tremendous number on inkberry or any kind of holly. They love those hollies.
Yep. And hollies produce a lot of nectar, to my understanding. I've planted a couple. I do not have a green thumb, though. Most of the trees and shrubs I plant end up looking like crap. I planted about 8 crepe myrtles. Crepe myrtle actually is a really good tree or bush for bees, and they, I don't know, they look awful. I've got 2 pretty ones and like 6 ugly ones.
The pink one seems to do the best.
Yeah. Apparently, from what I read when I was buying crepe myrtles, the white crepe myrtle is less hybridized, and so benefits the pollinators more, but they're all really good for the pollinators.
Okay, that looks like it's it on that part. So launch into the swarm catching.
You may have to give me a second to figure it out. It's a shame when the 11-year-old knows more than you do about it, ain't it? Hard time. Part of one of the organizations that I'm involved with, um, Tech Queen Breeder Association, we do a lot of studying on feral honeybees. And believe it or not, we're very unique in Appalachian Mountains that we have a really good, strong feral honeybee population. And so part of what the lure of feral honeybees is that they are surviving without help. Well, that ain't gonna work. Oh, here we go. So some of these features I'm going to show you and talk about them. Can you still see them, Chad?
Yes, sir.
All right. So feral honeybees are surviving without us, like I was saying. And so one of the things that through a lot of research that Purdue University figured out that these feral honeybees are actually grooming genetically or grooming bees or grooming moths and chewing the moths, which has helped them deal with that problem without our medication. What we do is we set out to catch feral honeybees, bring them back to our hives that are workable, and study each hive on what percentage of moths that we're finding on these boards that the bees are grooming and chewing, and then taking the strongest chewing genetics and putting those into our breeding programs. And we're having a really good success rate with what we're finding feral around here. They're chewing 50 and 60% of the moths that we're looking at. I will say this before we get started. Being up at 1 o'clock at night and looking at a tiny moth through a microscope can cross your eyes. But it's worth it in the long run if it benefits our bees. So early on, when we first started chasing the bees, we used these cone traps, and I liked them. We caught a few swarms in them. Here's one that we caught out of a pine tree up in the woods. But we were starting to see that the bees, they would pile up like this, and they were not going into the traps as well as what I would hope. So here is a picture of one from near my brother's house. And you can see he called and said the swarm just landed. And when I got over there, they wasn't trying to go in the box. I didn't know what was going on. And so I tried to look through it to see try to get the bees off of it, and they were fighting me for every breath. And so when I finally took it off the tree, I realized that they had been there for a while. They did not go in the trap. They started building off the bottom of it. And we were having some success with that. But then I met a gentleman by the name of Dwight out of Ohio, and Dwight Wells, and he is probably one of the hardest working beekeepers in the United States. And he told me that part of the problem was the entrance to the trap is one that will attract the scout bees, but then sometimes the bees hang up on it. And so he introduced us to this current design that we use here. This has a slot, and you can see the entrance here it's about 4 inches long, ½ inch wide. And we have not had that happen since we went to this design. Last year, we put out 25 of these wooden traps, and I'll show you a better picture of them. And out of those 25 traps, we caught 23 swarms. This year, we have already caught probably around 25 using this design, and it is one that I really like. So this is the front of the hive. The landing board, if you go to the website, Horizontal Hive, it has the actual original pattern for this. Horizontal Hive does. We did modify it some. This porch here is something we added, and it has this hinge. It folds up over this screw, and the wing nut comes off, and you can screw that on, and it holds them in there so they can't get out when you're transporting them. So that was one thing we did. The other thing, now this is part of the pattern, but I want to see it. This is the back of the hive. and it has an inch hole for ventilation. And then inside there, we put the 1/8 inch hardware cloth. We don't want them coming in out of it, but we want them to use that for ventilating the hive, and it also works for our swarm lure as far as making sure there's plenty of smell coming out of the box. Each trap that we set out, we do put 4. It's basically a 5-frame nook on top of a 5-frame nook is about the size of this thing. We put 4 unpulled frames and then 1 pulled frame from a dead out or a hive that we pulled frames from. It's not necessary to have the pulled frame, but I can tell you it increases the accuracy of the hive a lot. So it's basically 1 pulled frame and 4 unpulled frames, and then a dead space in the bottom. We have hung these things up in just about every height that you can imagine, anywhere from setting them on the ground to 15 feet up in the air, and we've caught bees in every single location. So if you read the textbooks, it says the facing south-southeast, 9 to 15 feet, but I've got them that's 2 foot off the ground that's got bees in them right now. So I don't know a whole lot about the accuracy of that number. Here's one we got hung in a tree. We don't use nails. A lot of landowners that don't like nails in their trees. So we use ratchet ties and we put it around the box. Typically like to have a limb for it to perch on. And that right there is basically the setup we use for catching our feral bees. If you look on the side of the box next to the tree, you'll see a little silver latch. That is a screen door latch. We put them on both sides of it because first year we didn't do it, and we were taking it out of the tree limb caught the lid come open, and we got stung a lot. So that has helped us not get stung as much because the lid won't come off of it. As far as issues you have with trapping bees, bears stink, and unfortunately we're always going to be dealing with bears. Here is one of our traps last year. We went on a Sunday, found that it had bees in it. We went back with our suits on Monday morning and found this. A bear had grabbed the hoe of the entrance, pulled the entire bottom of the box off, and tore all the frames out. So just know that there are bears in your area. Pike County, Letcher County are full of them. There's the trap I just showed you with some of the ferret caught in the staple that he exposed. So unfortunately, we have to deal with bears, and goodness knows I hate them. I'll be the first to tell you I don't have no love for them. And then, so I thought I had some videos on here, but I apologize if I don't. Here's a video, if I can get to play. So this is one of our traps that has caught a swarm. Boy, it's a short video. But again, you can see the bees there on the entrance. It couldn't be easier. Now, the handle is different on this one, and I actually like this handle better. This is just a screen door handle, and the strap will go straight through the handle. It's perfect for hanging them in anywhere. It's a lot easier to deal with. Bears are not always the dire end of the trap. Sometimes the bears are not successful in getting the trap down. Here's one that the bear visited, and he, as you can see, turned it sideways, straight up. But if you look, the bees are still fine. And I will tell you that that's my buddy Tony talking there as we try to figure out how to get this thing out between these trees this bear wedged between. You can see the scratch marks. Funny note on this particular removal here, the bear had reached around the back of the hive and tore out the little screen for the vent, and we did not know that. So we closed up the front. He wrecked me the hive, and I stuck my finger through the screen, and I got several stings for my effort. But again, if you get them strapped in good, a lot of times the bears will knock them around, but they won't necessarily get the bees out of it. So, and here again is another one that's caught a swarm. One of the things I do want to note, if you start swarm trapping, and you can see the latches on the side there, even though it looks like there's a lot of bees coming in and out of these traps, we do not move them until we see pollen coming in. If you see foragers gathering pollen or drones flying, then you know the swarm has moved in, because scout bees will come in numbers of 100 or more if they really like the place and want to check it out. And so if you take it down too soon, you can actually detour them away from your trap. So general rule of thumb for us is unless we see pollen come into the hive, then we wait. We don't bother it, because you don't want to turn them away from it being over anxious. So I got maybe a couple more videos here. Then I want to show you some pictures of these moths. So here's another one. Again, you can see the bees coming into the trap, and there was some pollen in some of these videos. I did it long enough you can see the pollen going in, but always good to walk up on a trap and see that right there coming in. The other one more of the bees on a trap that I want to show you. So, and when I talk about feral bees, one of the concepts that most people think of is high timber and out in the middle of nowhere. But feral bees are actually everywhere. Pikeville, the city of Pikeville, actually has a really high population of feral bees. And every year I get swarm calls from around Pikeville, and we actually trap in Pikeville. We've caught 2 there already this year. And so this is a swarm. We happened to get there just as the swarm was landing on the trap that evening. So I'm going to play it. It's pretty cool to see the bees actually going into the entrance. So there you can see the bees there on the left. I mean, they're pouring into that flock. And this is in the middle of downtown Pikeville right here. So just a wonderful swarm. And all the bees that we've caught in the city are actually chewing moths. So you can see that it's not always high timbers and remote areas. Bees love to live in buildings and stuff. And a lot of times in the city too, there's floral sources available that might not be available out in the timber, because a lot of people plant different flowers and shrubs, and they have a good source of nutrition in the cities. So when I talk about mite chewing, here is a mite. If you look on the right side here, 1 leg, 2 legs, 3 legs, this 4th leg is missing, and both the first 2 legs on the left are missing, and then you see a normal leg. This mite was groomed and attacked by the bees, so this is what we're looking for when we look at the mite and the bees' ability to chew it, or the bees' tendency to chew it. If you look at this mite, he's missing legs, and they've actually chewed his body. Again, the mites don't clot, so any damage to this mite will result in his death, or her death, rather. Her death, because she can't recover from that. And then a couple more just to see. This mite here is missing all of its legs. It's got 1 leg and it's missing the other 7. So these bees really didn't like that thing. And so what does that mean for you as a beekeeper? Opportunities for queen rearing, of course, is one we preach. And going back to nutrition, which is something I try to tie into every talk. If you look at this cell cup, that white is the royal jelly in which these bees have produced and fed that queen. If I'm raising queens and I don't see this, then that queen is claimed as a failure because it takes a lot of royal jelly to produce a high quality queen. And so this picture here shows a perfect example of that. And that's one of the things I love about these JZBZ cups is that even on the darker colors like this one, you can see exactly how much royal jelly, and you can tell too, the cells are nice and big, but still I can see how much royal jelly that queen's being fed. And that right there is money right there. And so through that, through selection and through a breeding program, you know, you can, well, I did that right. You can really increase your genetics of your hive. So you can look here across, and each one of these cells are big fat cells with tons of royal jelly in the cell cups. And this is off one of our breeder queens that we have selected for mite chewing. And last year, the entire year that we've checked, and we checked it about 5 times throughout the summer and fall, we only found 4 mites in this hive on the bottom on the whiteboard, and out of those 4, 3 of them were chewed. So this hive is one of our favorites. So and her daughters are all showing pretty good promise of chewing behavior too. So again, you know, just talking about a breeding program. These are II queens. So we do number those. I'm a big fan of marking my queens so that I know who's where and why. So we can keep up with those records with each one of those hives. So basically that is my spiel on swarm trapping and why it's so important. If y'all got questions about the design of this box, or any questions about how we hang them, or anything like that, it's a good time for it.
Neil, we've had somebody that has been using a hive catcher or swarm catcher. And
I know who he is.
Yes, I thought you did. And I think they put lemongrass in those, don't they?
Lemongrass oil is a really good bee lure. But I will tell you why I personally don't use it. Tony and I, we have bought, when we first started swarm trapping about 3 years ago, we bought some of every swarm lure that was available. Swarm Commander, at that time, Bracey Mountain, Man Lake lures, Date Ant lures. We even bought a couple of lures that were sold, you know, like on eBay. And I will tell you that we caught bees with every single lure, not just, and none more than the other. We caught bees in all traps with all the lures. So now we use the Man Lake lure. It's in a little yellow envelope, and we just staple it in the trap on the inside, about an inch over top of the entrance is where we place it. And I do that because here's what I was leading into. Too much of a good thing is a bad thing. Lemongrass oil, if you put too much of it, it will actually turn the bees away. And I will tell you that I am not capable of not overdoing it. So I buy a $2 lure. To me, they last a whole season. Some of our boxes right now are catching their 3rd swarm on the same lures. And so that $2 lure has then caught me $300-400 worth of bees. So I'm okay with that. But you can use lemongrass, but be really careful on how much lemongrass you put in there, because a few drops is a lot in the lemongrass world. If you put too much, the bees will shy away from it. Swarm Commander, even like the sprays, it tells you not to overdo it. So anytime I'm using the Swarm Commander spray, I tend to go on the not as much side versus the too much side, because I'm always worried I'll overdo it.
You covered the very thing I wanted you to cover. Good job.
I will say this too. I've used Swarm Commander this year on 2 dead out hives that we had in Pottsville that died last winter at our office, and both of those hives are now occupied with swarms. But again, I'm using it lightly versus locked. I know the one gentleman is very dissatisfied with his results with Swarm Commander, and rightfully so. He's had some bad luck with it. So
looks like we've got a couple of comments. One is Jaquita saying that the only thing they had swarming was sweat bees today. I don't know. She needs to be a writer because she's got a way with words. The second one is from Phil Meeks, and he's asking, is there a method to where you place the traps?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the things that we look for, believe it or not, is if we're out in the early spring, autumn olives is a big indicator of bee population. So we look for places where we actively see bees flying, gathering nectar. Because if you see bees on autumn olives in this area, they're not too far away because autumn olives are everywhere. So we look for places where we're seeing bees water, because bees will naturally go to a closest water source. Or if we see bees on a nectar source or a food source, and that you know that there's a bee population somewhere there, and we hang in those spots. So it just depends, really, in the early spring, what they're working and where we see them at.
Any other questions for Neil?
I have a couple of things, Chad. Neil, do you have a practice of, like when you have a trapped hive, do you move it a certain distance from the trapped location to make sure, won't the bees return to that location if you just move them around the corner or something like that?
Well, yes, but for the most part, the bees I'm trapping are miles and miles away from my house. So when I bring them home, they're not going to return. If it is, I will say this, about a week and a half ago, I had one of these empty traps sitting in my carport, and a swarm flew in it. And because of that reason, I closed it up and took it to Tony's house. So, and Tony lives about 30 minutes from me, so it was far enough away that my carport didn't get swarmed the next day. But yes, if you're trapping near your house, and you will have the worker bees will return. 2 miles is the general distance that you want to move a hive, especially this time of year, so that the worker bees don't return to the original location. But again, most of my traps are scattered all over Pike and Floyd County, so I don't have 1 or 2 within 2 miles of my place. So.
Okay, I have another question, Neil. On once you capture a swarm, how do you transfer it to a brood box? I assume it's just standard frames inside those traps. Is it just a matter of taking those frames?
It's a matter of picking the frames up and setting them in it. Yeah, I will say this though. Now Dwight Wells, his traps are actually 2 5-frame nooks with frames in both boxes. Because I'm putting mine out in a remote location and the one piece is easier to hang, they will, if you leave them in it too long, they will start pulling wax off the bottom of the frame. So we check our traps. We try to check them weekly, but with work and stuff, we're lucky to check them every other week. But getting them out of that box quickly will help you a lot with not having burr comb off the bottom of the frame. But it's just as easy as picking them up and setting them over into the hive. That's what's so great about that design. I mean, it's very user friendly, and the bees really like the design of these boxes. this cone design is way harder to get the bees into a box. Way harder. It almost becomes a cutout situation if they're left in this thing too long, because they will start pulling wax from the top, and all that. And so it's a lot easier to damage the queen or to kill bees, when you're transporting these cone traps. So and then trying to convince them to go into a box for a minute, like right here. You can see I'm trying to coax them in this box. So it's a lot more difficult.
Neil, we got a couple more. One
Okay.
is, how late in the year can you catch swarms?
Well,
It's more like, how late in
generally,
the year can you keep them alive?
right. Well, it depends on how much you want to feed them. Swarm season for us, generally we put our traps out the 1st of May and we leave them out through July. If you catch a swarm in late July, just be prepared to make sure you're supplementing a lot of food for them. It's very possible to get them through, as long as you're willing to do that work. But we will probably take all of our traps down before the end of July.
And what would be the to go along with that, what would be the minimum size before you would say, all right, I'm going to combine this swarm with?
It depends. One of the things that I'm after when I trap my swarms is genetics. So the queen in the swarm is a very big importance to me. If I catch a swarm in July and they're on 2 or 3 frames, they're small, I will go into some of my larger hives and pull them a rack of cat brood, try to give them a boost in their population. I will make most efforts to build that hive up. I will say that I have wintered single deep 8-frame hives very well. This year I wintered a 3-frame nuke through winter. 3 frames of bees going into winter, and it made it.
This was a mild winter.
That's true. But if you can get your hive on good 8 to 10 frames of bees, and you make sure you provide it with winter feed inside the hive, either sugar or fondant or a winter patty, it's very possible to get that hive on through winter.
Okay. And Chiquita commented that she saw her first swarm of her life this spring, that they were able to collect it, but it didn't make it through that cold snap. So
yeah, we had that late cold snap. Was crazy. Tony actually lost a swarm during that cold snap. Now my bees here at the house hadn't started swarming that bad before that, but now they've showed themselves the last few weeks. Unfortunately, I love to preach swarm prevention, because by all means I don't want my bees swarming, but every year work and time and energy play into me not getting all my work done, and so I have swarms. But that cold snap was brutal. This whole weather, this whole spring has just been one of the worst springs for beekeeping that I can remember. We had very little weather for autumn olive, had that cold snap and freeze. Blackberries, it rained, tulip poplar, it rained, and then they had that cold spell. Ironically, locust was probably the best bloom I've had here in years. I do believe that's the only reason why my bees are doing well. They had a couple weeks where they were able to work locust, which never blooms here, but this year was covered. So I'm thankful for that.
Well, Neil, we want to thank you for the talk you've given. Very informative. And
I hope I did okay. This is all new to me, this noon stuff.
oh, you did a great job. Very good.
I appreciate y'all having me. I really do. Letcher County Group's always been close to my heart. I like coming up there and visiting. Of course, Alan's one of my best friends, so I'm honored that you'd even asked.
Well, thank you. We knew that you were more than capable of giving the talk, and you didn't disappoint. So thank
All
you
right.
very much.
All right, thank you guys.
You're getting a lot of kudos from the folks in the chat box. So
Well,
nice.
good. I appreciate it, really, I do. And anytime you all need anything, feel free to reach out to me. I've got Facebook. It's NEILHUNT. If you send me a request, it's always a good idea to let me know who you are, because I get quite a few. So, but yeah, just reach out for anything you have questions on, any comments. I love talking bees. So.
Very good. Well, folks, we'll try to get this uploaded onto YouTube. And what's our next talk, Jeremy? Did you look to see what we have up next?
Yeah, next week we got two great ones as well. We've got on Tuesday night we got Dr. Jonathan Larson from the University of Kentucky, and he's going to be talking about ticks, chiggers, and other woodland insects. I heard him give a similar discussion on this a few weeks ago, and it was great. So we thought it would fit in very well, that y'all would enjoy it.
And it is an election year, so.
Yeah. On Thursday night, I think we have Shannon Rice, who's going to be talking about shopping on a budget.
Hey, if you don't forget, or remind me when it's ticks and chiggers time, I'd like to hear that.
We will definitely send you the notice there, Neil. It'll be next Tuesday at 6 o'clock. And
all right, that'll be a good one.
All right, very good.
Awesome.
We've got a new tick in Eastern Kentucky, so that might be of interest to folks.
Definitely.
We needed more bloodsuckers.
Yeah.
Talking politicians again.
Well, folks, thank you all for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it informative, and we will plan to see you next Tuesday. Have a good weekend.
All right.